So in today's video, I'm going to wrap up Q4. So that's all the books I read in October, November and December. Of course, I've already done my monthly wrap-ups for each of those months, but what I do in my quarterly wrap-up is give you the stats behind the quarter and then also talk about 8 of the top romances that I read in the last quarter. Now, if you've watched my December reading wrap up, then you'll know that I had a fantastic reading month and I had 5 5-star reads. So some of the books that I'm going to be talking about today are going to be a duplicate of the books that I've already talked about in my December wrap up, and therefore it's also really likely that I'll also be talking about some of these books in my top 10 romance reads of 2024, as well as my top 8 mafia romances of 2024 that are going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So let's get stuck straight into the reading stats. So in the final quarter of the year, I read 49 books, which was a total of 17,374 pages, which came out at 188 pages per day on average. So I did really well in Q4. If you've been following me for a while, then you know that I had a bit of a slump in the middle of part of the year, and particularly Q3 was particularly challenging, but I caught up on my reading goals in the final quarter, had some fantastic books that I read, and also managed to smash out quite a lot of pages as well. So in terms of the star ratings, I had one book I did not rate because it was a beta read, but I had 4 3 stars, 13 3.5 stars, 17 4 stars, 9 4.5 stars, and 5 5-star reads, which, like I said, I read all of my 5-star reads this quarter in December. So a brilliant finale to the year. In terms of how I read them, I had 2 audiobooks, 1 beta, 5 ebooks, 31 Kindle Unlimited, 7 physical books, and 3 that I started as audiobooks and finished on KU. And then in terms of the subgenres of romance that I read, I had 3 alien romances, 2 billionaire, 5 contemporary, 5 dark, 1 dystopian, 5 erotic, 3 fantasy, 16 mafia, 1 romance, 2 monster, 1 omegaverse, 1 paranormal, 1 sci-fi, 1 small town, and 2 sports romances. Now, in the quarterly wrap-ups, I normally just talk about my 5-star reads, but like I've said, all of the 5-star reads I had were in the month of December, and I've just done my December reading wrap-up. So I thought what I'd also do was talk about my favourite book that I read in October, and a couple of highlights from November as well, and then let you know what I rated 5 stars in December. So the book that I want to talk about that I read in the month of October is For the Fans by Nyla K. This is an romance stepbrothers, so it's a bit on the taboo side as well. They're in close proximity, enemies to lovers. It's a bi-gay awakening, and we were following Kieran and Avi. Now, I really enjoyed this one. And my only complaint and why it wasn't a 5-star read was just because of how long it was, at 546 pages. And in addition, I think the ending was dragged out quite a lot. The start of this book had really a lot of pace, a lot of connection between these characters. And then when it came to the 3rd act breakup, it felt then that it really kind of dragged and there was a bit of a lull. Now, I did say at the time, I felt that in some ways, the characters needed the time that this book took in order to get where they needed to be by the end of it. However, as a reader, I very much wanted the pace to be a little bit quicker, and I could definitely have got to the end of their story before the 546 page mark. But I know not everyone is going to agree with me there, but that is personally why I didn't find this one was a 5-star read. But I have thought about this book quite a lot since I've read it. There's definitely some scenes and some moments in here that have really stood out and really stuck with me. And I thought it was absolutely fantastically written, a very emotional book, and really well told. So like I said, we are following Kieran and Avi. Now, Avi is kind of a artistic kind of person. On the outside, it looks like he's fairly lazy. He doesn't really have any kind of clear direction, doesn't know what he wants to be when he grows up, but he is an artist, very talented, and draws kind of lots of pictures. And he also kind of like dresses in that kind of Grundy arty kind of style, and also relaxes by smoking a lot of weed and things like that. So for all intents and purposes, he looks on the outside like he lacks any kind of like career aspirations or any kind of drive. On the flip side of that, Kieran is very athletic. He is on the football team, he's a quarterback, he's potentially going to turn professional, so very, very good, extremely motivated. Now, Kieran's father marries Avi's mother, and this makes them step brothers, but they don't actually end up living together until they're kind of like in their teens, basically. So they haven't grown up together, but they end up living in the same house and becoming step brothers when, like I say, Avi's mum marries Kieran's dad. Now, instantly, they don't get on at all. In particular, Kieran doesn't like Avi, and Avi tries to be nice to him and everything, but Kieran isn't having any of it, really kind of looks down on him, doesn't want anything to do with him, and really, really very much keeps their distance between each other. And then once they finish high school, they end up going to the same university, and Kieran's very unhappy about this because Kieran really wants to get away from home. He doesn't have a great relationship with his dad, and he was hoping that university would be a fresh start for him. He'd get away from everything, but Avi follows him there. But they do live on opposite sides of campus, and again, for all intents and purposes, they stay away from each other as much as possible. Now, also it's worth noting that Kieran's father is quite wealthy, so all of their sort of tuition, their accommodation, their food and everything are paid for by Kieran's father, and they, you know, don't have to struggle too much. Until then, it comes to a bit of a head because Kieran's father has a downturn in his business and ends up losing quite a lot of money and is struggling to pay the bills, and ends up having to say to them that he's no longer able to pay for their accommodation or tuition at college, and this puts both Kieran and Avi in a bit of a financial bind. But Avi comes up with this fantastic idea to make some money, which is basically to start a For the Fans account, which is an equivalent of OnlyFans, where they are going to carry out or record some sexual content, put it on the internet, and people will pay to watch them. Now, Avi does this by himself at first, but then gets asked to make content with other people, and this is where he kind of drags Kieran into this, because he says to Kieran, this is really great money, you won't have to worry about your kind of rent or food or anything, you'll be able to still play, we can keep it under the radar, no one has to see your face, but they're asking for content with me, with another person, and I think it'll be great if we do it together. And Kieran basically really resists at first, really doesn't want to do it, but does a couple of scenes with Avi. It goes really well. It's very popular on this For the Fans site, and they make a lot of money, and so things then start to escalate where they start to do more and more things with each other. Now, Avi is very open sexually, he enjoys sex, and he also knows that he's bisexual, so being in scenes with Kieran is no big deal for him. In fact, he's fancied Kieran for quite some time, and so now he's quite enjoying himself, let's be honest. Kieran, on the other hand, is really struggling with his sexuality, and we find out that something bad happened to him in his past, which has really meant that he's very closed off. He doesn't want to admit his feelings, he doesn't want to admit his sexuality, but ultimately Kieran is gay, and so this is a story really of Kieran coming to terms very much with the fact that he's very attracted to Avi, enjoying their time together, but starting to think about the consequences of that, what it means for him as a person, what it means for him about how he thinks about himself, but also what his friends will say, what other people in the community will say, and obviously being a quarterback in a football team, being gay might make things a little bit difficult for him and his professional career. So like I said, I really enjoyed how Nyla K told this story. I was absolutely invested, really enjoyed these characters, and if you haven't read it yet, I would definitely recommend. But like I said, just on the caveat, it is quite long, and the third act breakup for me just does go on a little bit too long. That's only my personal opinion, and I can absolutely see why these characters would need that amount of room in order to develop and end up so that they could be together. So in November then, I read a couple of books from Gabrielle Sands, which I absolutely loved, and I want to talk about them now. So the first one is When She Tempts. This is book 2 in the Fallen series. This is a mafia romance, Italian mafia. There's an age gap. It's also a bodyguard situation, and we are following Mari and Gio. So this story continues straight where we left off the end of book 1, and at the end of book 1, Mari's brother is just about to go into battle to take over as head of the Italian mafia. So Mari is potentially in danger, and her brother really wants to make sure that she's safe and secure while this kind of battle is being fought. And so he asks his acquaintance, I won't say friend, I'll say acquaintance, Gio, if he will basically take his sister and keep her safe while all of this is going on. Now Gio is part of the mafia, but he's very much on Mari's brother's side, and he is an expert in security, tracking people down, but also keeping people hidden as well. So he's the perfect person to keep Mari safe, and he agrees to the task and takes her with him to a kind of secret location. And this happens to be a very nice house slash estate in the countryside, and also there is another man who is Gio's younger brother and an older couple who are the housekeepers. Now Mari also comes into this book very damaged and traumatized from things that have happened to her in her past, because in the previous book she was actually kidnapped and was going to be tortured and has been through a bit of a time basically. She also saw her best friend be unalived, and she is living with a lot of guilt and grief from that incident as well. So when she first comes to stay with Gio, she's in a really bad place, and she's also addicted to her mobile phone. So Gio not only wants to kind of keep her physically protected, he really sees her struggling mentally and decides he's going to help her in that department as well. And his methods are a bit unusual, but basically he decides he's going to confiscate her mobile phone, and he says if she can find the mobile phone, he'll hide it somewhere in the house, and if she can find it, she can have it back, or otherwise she's got to live without it. And so it's a struggle for her at first, but eventually she does learn to live without her phone, and then starts to develop relationships with the other people in the house and Gio as well. And I just really loved this relationship as it blossomed between them, because what we discover as well is that Gio very much thinks that Mari's off limits. She's much younger than him. Obviously she's ultimately going to be the new Don's younger sister, and that basically means that she'll end up being really valuable, right, and probably married off to somebody for political gain, for a power gain. And he knows that he's not really the right kind of man for her or deserving of being married to a mafia princess. So he very much tries to stay away from her, but they're in close proximity. She's a beautiful woman. He's not going to be able to resist too long. And this is called When She Tempts, because once Mari comes out of her stupor, she goes on a bit of a mission to see how far she can push him before he snaps, and she ultimately gets what she wants. So I really enjoyed this one. Like I say, I really enjoyed this couple and would definitely recommend. And then after that, I then went on to pick up this one, which is When She Falls, which is book 3 in the Fallen series. I actually listened to this one as an audiobook, and it was narrated by Gabrielle Spires and Alyssa Avery. Again, this is a mafia romance, another Italian mafia romance, enemies to lovers, forbidden bodyguard. He's the underboss of the mafia. She's a mafia princess, and she is engaged to be married to someone else. And we are following Raz and Gemma. So Raz is the underboss of the new Don, because yes, Mari's brother did win the war. He is now the Don of the mafia in Italy, and Raz is his underboss. And Gemma, who is sister to the heroine from book 1 and also the new Don's wife, and that is Damiano and Valentina. Now Damiano and Valentina are now going to be married officially, and so there's going to be a big wedding, and Valentina's family are invited from New York, because she's a mafia princess from New York, to come to the wedding on the island of Ibiza, because although it's an Italian mafia, they've been living on the island of Ibiza, and so that is where they're going to get married. And so Gemma comes over with her family to see her sister get married, and while she's there she gets sick. She's too sick to fly home, and so she is trusted into the care of Raz, and he's going to make sure that she gets home safely once she is better. But Raz and Gemma have got a bit of a history together. They've met each other before. They don't really get on with each other at all, and so yeah, they're going to have quite a bit of friction between them, as he's nursing her back to health but also taking her back to New York. But also they do hate each other, but they also love each other as well, and they're very attracted to each other. And so as they're now in close proximity and he goes back to New York with her and spends some time with her, the hate is going to get less and the love is going to get more, and they're going to struggle to stay away from each other. But the thing is, Gemma is actually arranged and married to Raphael, who is the hero from book before, and her family really need her to do this because they have been in quite some dire straits themselves in New York and need Gemma to marry Raf in order to strengthen their position and make sure that their enemies can't come for them. And so she is now torn between a rock and a hard place because she really doesn't want to marry Raf because she's in love with Raz, but at the same time she wants to do her duty and do the right thing for her family, and so she is now, like I said, torn. So the story is about what happens between Raz and Gemma. Are they going to be able to resist each other? And when they can't, what happens? What's the fallout going to be? And how are they going to get out of the situation they're in and mean that she doesn't have to marry Raf and can end up with Raz instead? So again, this was another fantastic installment. I love the world building that Gabrielle has done in these books. I'm really looking forward to reading book 4 in the series, which is on my TBR for January. And then another favourite of November was Twisted Emotions by Cora Reilly. This is book 2 in the Cora Chronicles, and in this one we are following Nino Falcone and Chiara Vitilo. So this is another mafia romance featuring the Las Vegas Camorra, and it's an arranged marriage between the Camorra and the Familiar in New York. We are following a psycho hero. Nino is very much a psychopath and Chiara is very much a damaged heroine. So you know this saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Well, this is very much the foundation for this book, because the Camorra and Familiar are definitely not friends, but they have one shared enemy, and that is the outfit in Chicago. And so they decide that they are going to join forces against the outfit, and in order to kind of like cement this deal that they've made, they have agreed to an arranged marriage between Nino, who is Remo's brother and second command of the Camorra, and Chiara, who is a mafia princess for the New York Familiar. The thing is that Chiara was sexually abused when she was a young girl, and this was at the hands of her uncle, and so she has been terribly traumatized ever since, quite rightly so. And the thing is, she's not really been able to tell anyone because of how it happened, and actually her father was a traitor, so she's been very badly treated since this happened, and she doesn't think anyone's going to believe her. But she, like I say, she has been left very traumatized by what happened to her, and she cannot even bear the thought of being touched, let alone being intimate again with anybody. So when she is asked to be arranged in marriage to Nino, she agrees because she wants to do her duty to her family, and also it's a good opportunity for her to kind of leave the situation she's in and start a new life with Nino in Las Vegas. So that is absolutely the pro of marrying Nino, but the con of marrying Nino is that she has heard about his reputation. She knows that he's basically a psychopath. His reputation definitely precedes him as a very sort of cold, callous kind of person who doesn't hesitate to be brutal and unforgiving of his enemies. And also she's seen him in the cage fights because he's basically a cage fighter, a very good one, and leaves people pretty bloody and pummeled. And so she's seen him almost at his worst, and so while she wants to do her duty to the family and also escape New York to Las Vegas, she's also pretty terrified of her new husband and also what's going to happen on their wedding night, because this is a very traditional Italian mafia sort of family, and when it comes to the Familiar, the tradition has always been that the woman should be a virgin on her wedding night, and after the couple have consummated the marriage, the evidence on the sheets is therefore shown to all of the family members to not only prove that she was a virgin, but also that the wedding has been consummated. And so she's absolutely dreading her wedding night. Still, she goes through with it, but Nino isn't as emotionless as she might think. While he doesn't feel emotions, he can very much understand them and see them in other people, and he very quickly realizes that she is absolutely petrified of him, and that maybe it's not only about him, but something else has happened to her. And so on their wedding night, Nino gets Chiara to tell him exactly what happened, and then he determines that it won't be her blood on the sheets, but her uncle's the man who did this to her in the first place. And so he goes about going to get him because he's at the wedding, and then basically gives the uncle exactly what he deserves. And in the morning, everyone gets to see the evidence of what happened. And then he takes Kiara back with him to Las Vegas. So this book absolutely gets off to a fantastic bang. And we are absolutely loving Nino right from the get-go. And then the rest of this book is about Kiara learning to trust Nino, and Nino helping Kiara to explore her sexuality, to kind of come to terms with what happened to her in the past and get comfortable with intimacy. And I thought it was really, really well done in terms of helping her get through her trauma. Now, I'm really looking forward to reading the 4th book in this series, Twisted Bonds, because I want to see the rest of what happens to this couple, because they get another book later on in the series. And in particular, I want to find out more about Nino, because we get quite a bit of backstory about Nino, what made him the way he is, and he definitely starts to feel emotions again by the end of this book. The thing is, he's struggling to deal with them and what that means. And I was expecting a little bit more of a blow up at the end of this book, in the 3rd act conflict maybe, but we don't quite get that. And so this book ends fairly abruptly without, I think, finishing off Nino's story. But I've been told that there's more to come in Twisted Bonds. So like I said, very, very excited to read more, continue reading in this series. Okay, so straight on then to all of the 5-star reads that I read in December. And because I've just talked about Twisted Emotions, it feels right to pick up and talk about Twisted Pride next, which is book 3 of the Cora Chronicles, and the book that follows Twisted Emotions. And now we are getting Remo and Seraphina's story, because Remo is the head of the Las Vegas Cora, and Seraphina is one of the princesses who belongs to the outfit. And as I've already said, the Cora and the Familiar in New York have just joined forces against the outfit. So the outfit are the big bad baddies that Remo absolutely wants to take down. In particular, they really, really want to take revenge against Fabiona's father, who happens to be the consigliere of the outfit. And so they hatch this plan to kidnap Seraphina on her wedding day, and then use her as a bartering mechanism, basically to exchange her for Fabiona's father, so they can finally torture him and unalive him as he deserves. And Remo thinks this is going to be super easy, right? But Seraphina surprises everyone, because they do in fact steal her on her wedding day. Here she is in her wedding dress, and he takes her back to Las Vegas with him. And his plan is very much to break her, put her in her place, and torture her so that he can really make the outfit squirm. But Seraphina gives absolutely as much as she gets, and she refuses to bow down to Remo. Now, most people are scared of him, and don't get me wrong, Seraphina is definitely afraid of Remo, but she's also determined to stand up for him and stand up for herself. And Remo does actually quite respect her for this, but also is very puzzled and leaves him in a bit of a situation, because he doesn't quite know what to do with her, because she pushes some of his buttons and he is completely alarmed by his personal reactions to what she's doing. And he finds himself very much in a place where he really, really is starting to like her, respects her, and doesn't want to hurt her. He can't bring himself to be mean to her, and so he's sort of a bit flabbergasted, really. He doesn't quite know what to do with this situation or with Seraphina. At this stage, it's a very much a captive tale, right? And they're in a very love-hate sort of situation, because Remo really, really wants to be cruel to her and send her on her way, but equally is very drawn to her, very attracted to her, and is starting to fall for her. Meanwhile, Seraphina is, you know, holding on to her pride. She wants to make sure that she gets back to the outfit. She wants to do her duty to her family, but equally she is starting to fall for Remo, and she feels a lot of guilt and hatred towards herself for how she's starting to feel about Remo. But ultimately they are not going to be able to resist each other, and they do start a physical relationship with one another, despite fighting each other at every step of the way. Still, we get to the point in the book where eventually the outfit do agree to a trade, and Remo does have to hand Serafina over. Now, Serafina is absolutely devastated that he's done this because she was holding out hope that maybe he wouldn't and he would want to keep her. And Remo is kind of hoping that if he sets her free, she'll find her way back to him and come back to him willingly, and that's what he kind of really wants. But of course, once he lets Serafina go, she's too prideful to admit her feelings and come back, and so she goes back to the outfit. And then the rest of this book is the consequences of what happened when they were together, what that means for their future apart, and ultimately the war still has to go on, right? So more things are going to happen in this story, and I don't want to say any more to spoil this if you haven't read this before, but if you haven't, I would highly recommend it. And there is absolutely a fantastic ending to this story that I absolutely loved, and I absolutely love this couple, really well deserving of all of the hype that this book gets. Next up then, we've got Kingdom Fall by A. Reilly. This is part of the Underworld Kings Mafia sort of series. It is a mafia romance, therefore it's also a nanny romance, secret society, single dad, and a revenge plot, and we are following Natalia and Alessio. Now, Alessio is part of this secret society. It's kind of mafia adjacent, and he is essentially a torturer slash assassin. So it's his job in the society to go where he's needed to get information out of people and then unalive them at the end of the interrogation, and that's pretty much what he does for the society. He is pretty senior though, he's very senior in the ranks. He comes from quite a well-connected family, shall we say, and so does have quite a lot of power and sway in this community overall. Now, what we know about Alessio at the start of this book is that he has a 6-year-old son, and we don't know what's happened to the mother, but she's not in the picture, and he needs a live-in nanny, and he's obviously in a situation where he really should take a society woman to be his nanny, but most of them just want to marry him because he's so well connected, and he's not really up for any of that. And so he kind of puts out a regular ad, a standard ad for a nanny, and he's going to be very particular by the person that he employs to do this job, because security and secrecy are obviously of the utmost importance. Also, this person is going to be a live-in nanny, so that also has additional responsibilities, and pretty much whoever he employs is not going to be able to just leave the job whenever they want, because once they're exposed to his life and what goes on in his household, they're pretty much going to have to stay the course. So the person who answers the ad and ends up being the nanny for Alessio is Natalia, and as a reader we know that definitely something is going on with Natalia. We don't know what, but it's clear she's got a hidden agenda, a hidden motive, and it's also clear she doesn't really know who Alessio is, but she's definitely there to bring him down. But nevertheless, she is a very good nanny, and she gets on really, really well with his son, and he's very kind of protective of the son as well, which I thought was absolutely fantastic to see. And so overall, I absolutely love this story, because not only did this couple have great chemistry, there's great intensity between them. Alessio really kind of fights his feelings for her. And all of this time, like I say, we know that there's something bigger going on. We know there's something going on with this secret society. We know that there's something going on with Natalia and why she's there. And I just absolutely loved everything about this, from the relationship between this couple, the relationship that she had with his son, and then uncovering the plot, the backstory, kind of what is going on. So it's very suspenseful, very intriguing, kept me absolutely transfixed to every page, turning every page, and really, really wanting to figure out what was going on, and figure out a way for this couple to get their HEA as well. So absolutely brilliantly done. Would highly recommend. A great start to my reading month in December. Sticking with the mafia theme then, I've got Sweet Prism by Neva Altaj. This is book 10 in her Perfectly Imperfect series. Every single book I've read by Neva Altaj I've absolutely loved, and her books just keep getting better and better, and this one was no exception. So this is a Cosa Nostra romance. The hero is an ex-con because he's been in prison for 18 years. There's also a big age gap between him and the heroine, who also happen to be step-siblings, so this is a bit of a taboo romance as well. And I would also say this is a slow burn between Massimo and Sahara. So this is a companion novel really to book 9 in the series, because it's kind of a bit of a duet, because in that book we saw Nera, who is Sahara's sister, and very much what happens in that book is overlapped slightly with the timeline in this book. And so although you can read any book in this series in any order you want, I would recommend that if you want to read this one, that you read book 9 first, just for maximum enjoyment of the read, shall we say. So the hero in this one, Massimo, he goes to prison for 18 years for murdering someone who killed his step brother, in fact Sahara's full brother. But when he first goes to prison, Sahara's just a young girl, and so all he remembers of her is this young girl with pigtails. And the whole time he's been in prison, he's been really secretly running the mafia, because it's Sahara's father who is the don of the mafia, but it's Massimo really who was the brains behind the operation. And so Sahara's father has been visiting him every week in prison since he went away, and Massimo has been telling him exactly what to do, where to invest, what decisions to make, and all of that. So Massimo is really the mastermind behind everything, and the one really in control of this mafia. Now when Sahara is probably 10, 11, something like that, she's given a school assignment to write a letter to a relative, and she decides she's going to write a letter to Massimo in prison, and so she does. Now at first Massimo does not reply to her letters, but she continues to write to him over the years until one day he does in fact reply to one of her letters, and then they start this kind of pen pal relationship. Now Massimo realizes pretty quickly that actually she has a lot of information about what goes on in the household, and he starts to ask her some questions about who's been coming to see her father, what's been happening, what she overheard at parties, and so she kind of starts to become Massimo's spy. Now she absolutely is aware that this is happening, and he's not trying to con her or manipulate her in any way. And they kind of enter this kind of silent agreement where she is going to give him tips and tricks, let him know what's going on. And this really, really helps Massimo, because over the years he started to realise that Sahara's father maybe isn't telling him the full truth about everything. And so, like I say, she becomes his inner spy. Now later on, when the father passes away, Massimo is allowed out of prison for the funeral, and this is when he first comes face to face with Sahara, because all of this time their letters have been completely innocent and he only thinks about her as a young girl. But now by the time she's at the funeral, she's 17 going on 18 and is very, very beautiful, and he now realizes that she is in fact a grown woman, and he starts to feel quite guilty about the danger he's putting her in by asking her to do some of the spying that he's been asking her to do. So he kind of tries to cut off this relationship, and a few more years pass before he eventually gets out of prison. Now when he finally does get out of prison, of course Sahara is going to be one of the very few people that he can trust, and so she agrees to kind of stay with him and live with him and kind of help him in the early stages when he's just come out of prison, and their relationship then is able to blossom at this point, and by this time she's in her early 20s. And so although this is a big age gap, it is a step sibling sort of relationship, I don't feel that this one is particularly taboo. I didn't feel icky at all reading this. Everything was completely innocent up to the point in time when she was of full age, and also haven't ever really lived with each other or known each other outside of the letters that they've been writing. And I just absolutely love the way this played out and the relationship between this couple. So again, would highly recommend and highlight to the end of the year. Next I've got The Horde King of Shadow by Zoey Draven. This is book 1 in her new series, The Hordes of the Elthica, and this is a spin-off from her Horde Kings of Dakar series, and this takes place about 200 years after the events of that series. In this one we are following Sarkin and Clara. Now Sarkin is a Horde King. He's also a dragon rider because his horde happen to fly dragons, and they come across the Dakari Sea because they are in search of heartstones. So they need heartstones to power their dragons, and they know that there is a heartstone in the capital city, and so that's where they go. But they also know the power is kind of waning from this heartstone, and so they're desperately in search of more heartstones. And this is where Clara comes into the situation, because Clara has a special gift and she can sense where heartstones are, and Sarkin knows about her powers and decides that he's going to take her as his wife. What Sarkin does is he goes to the capital city and he does them a deal, and he says, either hand Clara over and she can become my wife, or I'm going to raise the city to the ground using my amazing dragon. Obviously they don't want the city to be raised to the ground, and so they agreed to hand over Clara. In fact, Clara volunteers. She's more than willing to go in order to save her family and her people. And so now she belongs to Sarkin, and Sarkin takes her back across the sea on his dragon, and not only does he marry her, but also promptly tells her that if she's going to be married to him, she's going to be a queen, and that means that she's going to need to train to ride her own dragon and also go and get one, because the dragons are very, very intelligent, sentient creatures, and they've agreed to be bonded to these hordes, and you have to kind of choose your dragon, and you kind of like choose your fated dragon, and the dragon has to choose you in order for you to be able to kind of control and ride the dragon. So as soon as she gets back to home camp, she is forced then to enter a grueling training schedule in order to learn how to ride a dragon, and she is quite far behind quite a lot of the other people who are in training with her, because they've been training to ride dragons since they were babies, and she is, you know, a grown woman and now having to learn a lot of things very, very quickly. And in fact, time is fast approaching for the time in the season where the dragons will kind of like come together. So the unbonded dragons will kind of like make themselves available so that they can be chosen by a rider, and she needs to learn a lot of things very, very quickly. And of course, throughout this process, Sarkin comes to very much care about her and respect her, and also help her with her training, which puts them in much closer proximity, and they learn much more about each other, and their feelings go from there. So I really, really liked this one. I love Zoey Draven's writing anyway, and I'm really excited that she started a new series in this world, and I absolutely loved the dragon element and everything that happened, and the backstory that she's been building up so that we can leapfrog into the rest of the series, as I'm sure we're going to be hunting down more Heartstones. So definitely worth the read if you haven't picked this one up yet. This was a new release in December. And then last but not least, I've got Entreat Me by Draven. This was actually the last book that I read in the month of December, and was a fantastic end to the year. So this is a standalone fantasy romance. It's actually a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and we've definitely got an age gap here, a scarred and tortured hero, and we're following Ballad and Louvain, but there's also kind of a secondary romance going on in this book as well between Louvain's sister Cinia and Ballad's son Gavin. So like I said, this is very much a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and what we learn is that Ballad has been cursed by his ex-wife on her deathbed, because she dies after giving birth to Gavin, and then she puts a curse on both Gavin and Ballad. Now at first he doesn't believe that this curse has taken hold, but it absolutely has, and it kind of manifests itself when Gavin is just a young boy. And then we have his very good friend Ambrose, who is a sorcerer, and he sets about trying to find a cure for this curse. He needs to find a way to break this curse, and in the meantime he takes all of the curse from Gavin and puts it onto the father. So over the years Gavin is able to grow as a normal boy, but Ballad is becoming more and more tortured and warped and disfigured by this curse placed upon him. So he is very much the beast character in this story. In addition to this, the sorcerer needs to find more time, right? He needs more time to break this curse, and so he's kind of put a protective bubble around Ballad's fortress, and therefore time passes much more slowly inside the house. So this is why there's a massive age gap, because about 400 years have passed from when Ballad was cursed to kind of current day, and yet Ballad doesn't really look like he's aged that much, and his son has sort of grown up, so he's a young man now, but that is because he's allowed to kind of leave the fortress and come back, and when he's outside the time bubble he obviously is at the normal rate, and then when he comes back time slows down. Now one of the things I think is going to break the curse is when Gavin finds someone who will love him, and so he is out looking for a woman, and he meets Cinia, who is Louvain's sister, and falls in love with her because she's very, very beautiful, and starts to court her. The thing is, Louvain and Cinia's father is a merchant, and he's done some shady dealings with a villain in town, and now he owns this villain a lot of money. So he's our Gaston character, and this villain basically says, well, I'm happy to repay all your debts, call them null and void, as long as I can marry your beautiful daughter Cinia. And of course they don't want this to happen. Luckily though, Gavin is around, and Gavin says, hey, so you don't have to marry that evil guy. How about I pay off your debt, and in exchange you come back with me to my family home, i.e. the fortress, and you'll give me the winter to try and woo you. If at the end of the winter you've fallen in love with me and want to marry me, that will do that. And if you haven't, then I'll let you go, and no hard feelings, and debts repaid and everything, and away you go. So Sydney agrees to that and kind of runs off with Gavin, and Louvain is very, very unhappy about this, and then basically runs after her sister because she thinks that she needs a chaperone essentially to make sure that Gavin upholds his end of the bargain and her sister remains pure. So Louvain then travels after Cinia, and so both Cinia and Louvain end up in this fortress, and Louvain then starts a relationship with Ballad. Meanwhile, Gavin and Cinia are kind of courting each other. Of course, Louvain quickly realises straight away that something isn't quite right, and figures out that obviously everyone in this fortress slash castle is basically cursed, and they kind of work together then to figure out the cure. And what I really liked about this story is the relationship between Louvain and Ballad. I think it's absolutely brilliantly done. You could really feel the kind of chemistry and the love between this couple, and you kind of really wanted them to be together, and you felt so bad for Ballad because he's taken on this curse completely himself, and he's really been through the ringer with it. He's very tortured and scarred by what's been going on, and Louvain is just one of those people that can see past that into the heart of the man and falls in love with him regardless of how he appears. And so I just absolutely love this story. I absolutely love a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I think this is probably one of the best versions of it that I've ever read, so would highly recommend if you haven't read this one. Okay, so there we are, we've got to the end of the Q4 wrap up for 2024. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please give me a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content from me, and all that's left for me to do is thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Every single book I've read by Neva now but he's obviously looking for someone very particular. It's someone he needs to do a background check on, make sure that they you know, are completely squeaky clean, because although it's an Italian mafia, Don basically, like I say, is the underboss, and he's the underboss of the Don from book 2. So let's get straight. It takes all night, honey, I'm still fine.